Wow, the disadvantage of lightning talks is you've literally just had a talk, and now I feel like I should have made my slides voice automated. So I have missed an opportunity. I was about to say good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming along to all of our talks today. My name is Amy. I'm a front-end developer based in Perth. So I've travelled a grand total of about 4 days to get here, something like that. There was a boat, a train, a plane, something like that. I'm a front-end developer. I run a business and work part-time for another company. I also help organise a conference in Perth. And so 2 weeks ago, I organised an event for 1,200 people. I do this because I'm a little bit of a conference addict. I spend a lot of time travelling the world. Well, I'm getting back into spending a lot of time travelling the world and speaking at conferences. And in my free time, I like spending time in the community and going to meetups. So my favourite thing about going to conferences in other countries is I get to go to a few local meetups while I'm there. As you could imagine, I'm a little bit busy at times. I'm often juggling multiple things, and as a result, I tend to get overloaded and stressed. But there are a few things that I've learnt over the years, things that can help make it a little bit easier and to manage my health so that I don't burn out. Now, I want to add a disclaimer. I say I'm learning, not have learned. I do not have all the answers. I am fairly bad at taking my own advice every time, so please don't feel like I've managed to have it all worked out. I've burnt out twice in the last year, so still working on it. And with that, I want to talk about burnout. I have a tendency to do this occasionally, as you could probably tell with my overloaded schedule. And normally this is when I would ask if anybody else has experienced burnout. But this morning I watched about 2,500 people raise their hands during the keynote about experiencing burnout. So a few years ago, I had a few experiences that inspired this talk. During the space of a month, I started a full-time job. I interviewed 50 staff, hired 30 staff, crashed my car, rode off my car, was physically assaulted, found a new car, ran 12 workshops in 2 weeks, managed 30 staff, started a new degree, threw 2 birthday parties, looked for a rental house, and moved house. Oddly enough, I burnt out after this. However, I didn't realise that burnout was a thing. I did take a bit of a break afterwards, but it took me a really long time to get back to normal. A year or so after this, I was working at an agency, working 60 to 70-hour weeks. I was having trouble sleeping. I'd gotten to the point where I was constantly dizzy and nauseous, and I was burnt out again. However, this time I'd been to a meetup and I'd seen someone talking about mental health, and I understood that this was a thing called burnout. I understood that this was a thing that I had to deal with and do something properly. So I went to see my GP, to see my doctor in Australia, because in Australia, if you can get a referral from a doctor to go and see a psychologist, and you can get most of the costs covered. So I went to see my doctor, I explained my symptoms, and she instantly gave me a note that said I had a week off work because I needed to take a break. While I was on that break, I got a message from my boss who said, I know you're off sick, but can you come in for a chat on Friday? Clearly I was in for a promotion, right? I got made redundant. The day after that, I had the appointment with the psychologist I'd been referred to, and he had the note from my doctor that said I was experiencing work stress, so he asked, how's work going? And I laughed. I had no job. I had about a week's worth of expenses saved up, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. But somehow I was feeling better than I had in months, which told me that it was probably a good thing. Now, I've always been a bit of a worrier, so the fact that I was now unemployed should have been an issue, right? But for some reason, I was feeling good because I'd worked out that there are times when worry is useful and sometimes it's not. So there's good worry and bad worry. Good worry you can use to your advantage. I was a little bit worried, so I applied for jobs, I picked up some freelancing work, cut back on a few costs. From there, the worry wasn't actually benefiting anything. There wasn't anything more that I could do. So I stopped worrying. Well, I didn't just stop worrying. I continually told myself that the worry wasn't being useful, it wasn't helping me, and there's nothing I could do about it. Once I'd learnt that, I could start to use it to my advantage. Now, what this really is planning. So when I gave my first conference talk, I was a little bit worried. I used this to my advantage. I worked out everything that could possibly go wrong. Most of them did. I planned and was prepared for this to happen. After I'd finished preparing, there wasn't really much else that I could do, so I stopped worrying. Again, I kept reminding myself to stop worrying in case anyone thinks I've got a silver bullet. Now, this has then been an advantage because this planning means I'm prepared for when everything goes wrong. And I've been able to speak at a bunch of conferences because I've had the opportunity to plan and prepare. This year has also been a bit of an ongoing battle about the worrying. As I said, I planned a conference for 1,200 people 2 weeks ago. And the morning of the conference, I got a message from one of the speakers who was sick and couldn't make it. So I got to find a backup speaker with about 70 minutes notice. This is an ongoing battle that I'm dealing with. One of the other things that I learnt is about being productive. So who here has had a nice relaxing weekend and it gets to Sunday night and you're like, I've not really done anything and I feel really bad about it because I should have been productive. Who's done that? Yeah. However, you ever noticed that when you do that, it's usually at the end of a really long week and you kind of just need the break? So I realized that I was actually doing something all weekend, a really important thing, which was prioritizing myself. So I realized instead of feeling bad because I hadn't gone grocery shopping or I hadn't mown the lawn or I hadn't done any of this, I was prioritizing me, which is something that really needs to be done because we need the opportunity to recharge, which we talked about in the keynote this morning. So I thought a little bit further about a talk that I'd seen at a meetup event where someone talked about how they blocked out their time, including non-movable time, which was for prioritizing themselves. So I made sure I adjusted my schedule to include time for me. It could be taking my dog to the beach in summer. It could be having a cup of tea at the end of the day and reading a book. Even if it's just 5 minutes, making sure that I'm spending time prioritizing myself. And I think of this a little bit like the stamina gauge in Zelda, if you're familiar with it. As long as you take regular breaks, it recharges quickly. If you let it deplete altogether, you end up sluggish and lagging, and it takes a really long time to recharge. So doing this small breaks at regular intervals helps. Now, what this recharging look like differs to everybody. It might be reading a book with a cup of tea in the evening. It might be hanging out playing board games with a couple of friends. You might be really strange like me and recharge by standing in front of hundreds of people at a conference. I also learnt a little bit about boundaries. When I started my business, I prided myself on being able to help anybody at any point in the day. But as my business grew, I discovered it wasn't really scalable. But I heard somebody compare employer-employee relationships to our personal relationships with our partners. And so I thought about that. And I thought, if I had a partner who was continually calling me, who didn't like me hanging out with my friends, and who was continually hassling me because I hadn't responded to them immediately. Does that sound like a healthy relationship? Not really. So I drew some boundaries with my clients. I let them know when I was working. I let them know when I'd respond to emails. I let them know that phone calls were for my website is down, fix it now, and not non-urgent requests. Most of my clients were fine. They adjusted and contacted me and knew when they'd hear back. To be fair, the rest of my clients didn't object so much to my boundaries. They just ignored them altogether, continued to hassle me to the point where they asked me to come in and work at 9 p.m. on a Monday night in exchange for beer. Not being paid, beer. I don't drink beer. Apparently that wasn't an issue. I also have a really great resource, which I'm aware is impossible to read, but I will tweet it out afterwards, which is a flowchart to help me decide whether or not I want to take on new work and new clients. Every time someone gets in touch with me, I have a think about whether or not this is work that I want to do, or whether it's not going to be worth the mental energy. The last thing I learnt was when I read a book, the kind of book that you see sitting at the front of bookstores and airports a few years ago. While it did talk about a lot of obvious things, it had a really good point, which talked about the benefits and disadvantages of not caring. Because whether we realize it or not, we're always choosing whether or not we care about something. And so it got me thinking about how I allocate my ducks. Now, say you have 10 ducks to give about any situation. Maybe there's something that you care a little bit about, like which talk you go to, and you might give that decision 3 ducks. But maybe there's something that you care a lot more about, like whether you come to NDC. You might give that decision 9 ducks. Maybe there's something that you don't really care about at all. You don't really mind what happens, like what you have for dinner one night. And sometimes you just don't have any ducks left to give. So I started thinking about how I was allocating my ducks. Was I giving more ducks than I needed to? Was I giving enough ducks where it counts? Was I giving ducks to people or to situations who didn't deserve them? And while we don't get to choose everything we do in our life, we get to choose where we're giving our ducks. If you give too many ducks on things that aren't important, you may find that you're left with no ducks left to give at all. And if you're too stingy with your ducks, you may find that you're left with a lot of ducks and nothing important to give them to. Now, the original purpose of this talk was looking at sustainability, but everyone likes the ducks more. And the definition of sustainability includes some key words: avoidance, depletion of resources, and balance. And while we often talk about sustainability in terms of the environment, I want us to also think about sustainability in terms of our body. We only have one body, one mind, and one life. And it's up to us to look after it, because there's no going back. You can't just go to Mars if you don't look after your body. So next time you're worrying, ask yourself, is this useful? What good can you do with your worry, and at what point does it start becoming harmful? Block out time for yourself and make sure you're prioritizing looking after you. Don't let your clients, your boss, your family, or anyone else take time away from you. Draw a line, set boundaries, and if someone doesn't respect the boundaries, ask yourself if the relationship is healthy. Stick to your guns. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. We all need to have help sometimes. And most importantly, think about how you're allocating your ducks. Are you giving too many, too few, or to people who don't deserve them? Thank you.